The Giants already made one high profile extension during the season here, extending Logan Webb. And now that they've got a couple of young players who have a promising future, like Casey Schmitt and Pat Bailey, and also you think about Thairo Estrada, JD Davis, etc., are more extensions possible? Is that something we could see from this team like we've seen from the Braves? So we'll get to that question and so many others next.
You are Locked On Giants, your daily San Francisco Giants podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to Locked On Giants, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day. My name is Ben Kaspic, and on the show we provide daily episodes Monday through Friday talking about the San Francisco Giants in a way that's data-driven and rational, but also simple, passionate, and accessible to all. I'm a former contributor for the baseball statistics and analysis websites Beyond the Box Score and Rotographs. I've been podcasting about the Giants since 2015, and I'm a lifelong fan. Thank you for making Locked On Giants your first listen every day. We're free and available wherever you get podcasts. And coming up on today's show, we are going to be getting to some mailbag questions, a lot of which were left over from the last time we did this, and we had to scratch that plan and do an emergency episode about the promotion of Pat Bailey. And, the way things are going, we might have more days like that coming up with Luis Matos, Kyle Harrison, and others kind of seemingly on the cusp of the major leagues. But getting back to some of the questions, a lot of questions, interestingly, a lot of you want to know about extensions. And so getting right to it, Andre asks, could we be looking at a wave of extensions with Thairo Estrada, JD Davis, and LaMonte Wade Jr., or do you think they'll be selective? If the latter, who wins between Wade and Davis? Thairo seems like a slam dunk. Wade's plate discipline looks sustainable. Is JD's defense too new to say the same? And then relatedly, Brian asks, what are the chances of locking some of these young guys up for a few years before we lose team control? Davis, Estrada, Wade. Price tag now will be much less than after another year or two of current production if it's sustained. And so there's even more kind of extension questions coming up, and it's more about the extremely new players. And the Braves have kind of set the tone here with doing this with their players, whether they're brand new or not. And certainly sometimes when you've got a really good prospect, even if they just, like Corbin Carroll, for example, of the Arizona Diamondbacks, he debuted last year and just had a handful of plate appearances. I don't know exactly how many, but not that many, less than 100 or 100 or so. And they gave him $100+ million extension. And so it is a thing that teams do. But I want to where I immediately want to go with this is looking at what is the contract status of the players that you both mentioned, the same three, in JD Davis, LaMonte Wade Jr., and Thairo Estrada. And so starting with JD Davis, because each of these three has a different kind of status when it comes to how close are they to free agency. And for JD Davis, he's the closest, but he's not even going to reach free agency until after next season. So he's got this year, and he's under team control for next year as well. And so I guess before I comment on what I think, I'll then mention LaMonte Wade Jr. is under team control for this year, the 2024 season, and the 2025 season through the arbitration process, in which the team can go year to year. And then for Estrada, he's under team control for 4 seasons, including this one. So through the 2026 season. And so when the Giants extended Logan Webb, who I think is in a tier above all of these guys in that, he's kind of reached not the pinnacle, but he's a frontline starting pitcher. Whereas these three are kind of emerging as budding, perhaps all-star talents, but I don't know that we're quite at the level of where Logan Webb is. But so let's just start with JD Davis, because that's where I began initially. He's the closest. And I think a lot of it is going to depend on how the rest of the season plays out and if that third base position remains open for him. Because we look at right now, you can see if you're on YouTube, one of the questions that we're going to get to later is about what do you do about Brandon Crawford? And we discussed this yesterday. Brandon Crawford, he's not hitting. And so his spot in the lineup is like dependent on his defense, but the defense hasn't been good. And so if throughout the course of the season, and we're already kind of at that point now where you start to wonder about it, let's just say Brandon Crawford loses playing time more and more, given if the defense doesn't pick up and if the offense doesn't pick up, or both, then maybe Casey Schmitt, instead of being a third baseman, is kind of your answer at shortstop because you've got to have an answer at shortstop. This is the last year of Brandon Crawford's career. And so if Schmitt kind of takes on shortstop, which there's an argument to be made against that, given that there's always a debate about like a great defensive third baseman and you move him to the short and maybe that advantage they have defensively is kind of dampened a little bit by playing a more difficult position. So instead of being a great defensive third baseman, you're like a okay defensive shortstop. We've seen other teams do this with the likes of Manny Machado, and ultimately they tried him at short for a while, but he ends up back at third, and so that's something to follow. But if Schmitt does end up being like the answer at shortstop, not just down the stretch in 2023, but also moving forward, because like I said, it's the last year of Crawford's contract, and there's not an obvious like immediate answer at that position. The free agent class is weak, and so it could be that Schmidt's the guy. In which case, if you just want to commit to JD Davis, I could see them doing that, except I just think like the way the Giants like to operate is they don't like to force themselves into any positions. And if you force yourself into the position where it has to be JD Davis and there's no flexibility, then you're kind of like, what do you do if David VR just continues to tear it up in AAA and is deserving of a promotion, and yet there's really no room for him there? And so I don't know if I see a JD. He's played well enough to deserve it. So, I mean, what I'll say here is that the Giants, they did this with Logan Webb. I guess they also did it with Brandon Crawford in the middle of the 2021 season, where they tacked on 2 more years, which by the way, that ultimately hasn't really gone well. He didn't perform well last year and he hasn't performed well this year. But so they haven't done this much, and for Crawford at that time, he was about to reach free agency, and so that was a little bit of a different situation. But with LaMonte Wade Jr. and with Thairo Estrada, there's more time. So, there's no urgency to do this at this point. The question about, or the point about like the longer you wait, if they keep performing well, the cost is going to be higher. Yeah, that may be true, but for a guy like Estrada, if he has just a good year this year and you still have 3 years of team control, I think you're still in a pretty good position, just like with Webb. I mean, he had 3 more years of team control, had established himself as a frontline arm, and still the contract he got, it wasn't like crazy, simply because those arbitration years, even when you do an extension, are discounted. And so uh, basically, I think it's possible, but I don't know if they're just like in a rush to do it, especially with guys like Wade and Estrada who have that at least 3 years of team control remaining. And so if they really believe JD Davis is just like a slam dunk, really good major league third baseman, both offensively and defensively, he would be the guy first on the list simply because he's the closest to free agency. I think he likes being here close to home. So it's definitely something to watch out for, but I don't have any inside information, and you're onto the right track. I think that these are guys worth considering extending, but with some of them there's less of a rush than there are with others. So that's kind of my take on that. So the next question is going to be coming up in just a minute, and it's going to be about Patrick Bailey and Casey Schmitt and if they apply when we're talking about extensions. And also we're going to be saying or getting into how excited should we be about Luis Matos, who's in AAA and just doing everything you could want at that level after a quick promotion from AA. So all of that coming up in just a minute. But before we get into it, this episode is brought to you by my absolute favorite new shorts, Bird Dogs. They are the total package in that I put them on and immediately my thought is, wow, these are extremely comfortable, more comfortable than any shorts or pants that I've ever owned. And then I, go try them on, show them off for the girlfriend, and she says immediately, just like I felt when I put them on, thinking how great the comfort was. I hadn't looked at them yet in the mirror, but she looked at them and said immediately, "Wow, these are the best looking shorts you've ever worn." And I've worn plenty of shorts that I again don't haven't found the most comfortable either. And so the right away just the looks of the shorts and by the way, I finally did look at them in the mirror and I completely agreed, and the comfort and the versatility, because we're talking, something that's comfortable but also looks good and classy, has that versatility that you can wear to a meeting, you can wear to a golf course, you can wear hanging out with friends. And so I highly encourage you to check it out for yourself and go to birddogs.com/lockedonmlb. And when you enter promo code lockedonmlb, they'll throw in a free custom Bird Dogs Yeti style tumbler with every order. If you're watching on YouTube, I'm holding it up right now. I got mine right here and it's very high quality, nice Yeti style tumbler. So go to birddogs.com/lockedonmlb and enter promo code lockedonmlb for a free Yeti style tumbler with every order. All right, as promised, more questions and answers. Thanks again for making Locked On Giants your first listen every day. Every dayers tomorrow on the show, we'll be breaking down Game 1 in Milwaukee. The Giants trying to turn the page quickly from this very disappointing loss that they had against the Twins, going for the sweep, had all kinds of chances, but you try to quickly turn the page. It is going to be a bullpen game for the Giants. Scott Alexander making the start. Is it going to be Sean Manaea or Tristan Beck or whoever following him? I'm not entirely sure. And the Brewers are listed as TBD, although I've seen elsewhere that maybe Julio Teheran might make the start there. They just picked him up, and he would be a guy that hopefully the Giants could jump on. So we'll see how that goes. The Giants play the Brewers tonight at 4:40 Pacific. You can catch every pitch of the Giants' hometown broadcast with SiriusXM on the SXM app. Search Giants. So yeah, the next couple of questions related again with Basta asking if both Bailey and Schmitt continue to have success. Do we see either of them getting an extension similar to what the Braves have done with their young players? It also, if Bailey shows he's capable to stay up in the majors, do you think Bart gets traded? And again, the Braves are kind of unique in the way that they've done this. It's kind of, perhaps the right thing to do and a good thing to do, but the Giants haven't really operated this way. And I think that you want to be really certain that these guys are like true impact players before you start talking about giving them extensions like before they've barely played at all. And part of the reason for that is that they come along with 6 years of team control, and that's 6 years of service time. And so both of these guys got called up basically past the point in which they'll gain a full year of service time this year. And so really we're talking about 7 years of team control for both Bailey and Schmitt. And so there's really no sense of urgency to give them an extension. That's really like with Corbin Carroll and with some of the Braves prospects. Essentially, I'm saying no, but I wouldn't rule it out for like, if Kyle Harrison comes up and just immediately looks like a total stud, or Marco Luciano or whoever, if you prove pretty quickly that you're a total stud, and I don't think we're at that point yet with either Bailey or Schmitt, then it's possible, but I wouldn't expect this kind of news to just break any moment now that they've given these guys extensions, because they've got them under team control for so long, and there's just not necessarily a sense of urgency unless they're that talented. You're talking about the Wander Francos of the world, and like I said, Corbin Carroll. These are guys who were considered like top number one even prospects in baseball. And so it's a little bit different with Schmitt and Bailey, who a lot of analysts didn't even consider top 100 prospects coming into the year. But with Harrison and Luciano, a lot of people do consider them top 20 or so prospects. So it could be different depending on the player. But do I think Bart gets traded? The catcher situation remains super clear to me exactly how it's going to play out. A lot has to do with uh, Blake Sable. It's funny because I initially was saying I don't view him as someone who should be playing the outfield, but now the more I've seen of both him catching and him playing the outfield, I almost now feel more comfortable with him in the outfield than behind the plate. I think he's a good framer, but there's a lot of pass balls. There's a lot of balls that aren't blocked. I'm not being hard on the guy. He's kind of new-ish to the catcher position, especially at this high of a level. His framing is really impressive. I'm not sure if I already said that, but just yesterday he had a pass ball that led to some bad things happening, and we've seen it a lot. We saw it in Mexico City. There were pass balls, and so uh, therefore, like, if Bart gets traded and your two catchers are Bailey and Sable, I'm not certain that Sable is someone I want to be getting a ton of playing time behind the plate, whereas Bart is obviously a little more polished, I think, at this point. And however, I'm still down quite a bit on Joey Bart's offensive current skill set. I think there's the tools to work with there, and certainly the raw power is there, but he hasn't gotten to a lot of that power, whereas guys like Sable have. I mean, Sable has frankly been a better offensive player than Bart. So it's definitely possible. Like if Sable shows continued improvement defensively as a catcher, then Bart could be traded. But the thing is, Bart can also be optioned this year, and so it's possible when Bart is ready to come back, if they really like what they've seen out of Bailey, that they could option Joey Bart. And so none of this is clear to me, and we're just going to have to wait and see, and I do not have the answers. Next question comes from Lance, who says, how excited should we be about Luis Matos as he looks to be close? And then Curtis says, if Luis Matos earns a promotion to the big leagues, who does he replace? Or is his only path this year through injury? So it's a super, super relevant question about who does he replace? Because you've got Mitch Haniger, but Mitch Haniger's struggling in the outfield. You've got Michael Conforto, you've got Mike Yastrzemski, and then in a platoon situation right now, it's Bryce Johnson. And when he's healthy, it's Austin Slater. And so if you've got Slater healthy and you've got Haniger and Conforto out there and Yaz, it's pretty full, and it's hard to see how he fits. The team doesn't really generally go with like, oh, we want to have 5 outfielders, because honestly, they do have extra outfielders with guys like Wade and Peterson when he's healthy, and even Thairo Estrada and Sable. Like, they've got a lot of other guys who can play outfield, so I don't buy that, oh, Matos could be a 5th outfielder, because they've got 5th, 6th, 7th outfielders already on the roster. And so it kind of does have to come through injury, and that's why I've said right now Austin Slater is injured, and I think it would be a good time right now to give him an audition while Bryce Johnson is that other guy who's on the roster, because I think the ceiling is just so much higher with Matos than it is with Bryce Johnson. And so I guess the first question, how excited should we be about Matos? I'm pretty darn excited. The improvement he showed in Double-A, and then just a quick promotion to Triple-A where he's done nothing to kind of hurt his case. I don't actually have the numbers kind of pulled up. I didn't see what he did yesterday, but I'll quickly pull them up here. And I guess he had a bad day yesterday because the overall numbers have dipped to technically below the league average there. But, he had a stretch of games there where he was completely doing everything he could need to do. So maybe they need to see more. But I think it's a good opportunity while Slater is hurt and Bryce Johnson can simply be optioned to just give Matos some look and see what he can do and see if he can hold on to that role. And if he can, then I guess someone like Slater or even Yastrzemski becomes someone who could possibly be traded. But they're committed financially to Haniger and Conforto. And like Conforto, Haniger has a track record. We discussed this on yesterday's show, how the point at which Conforto turned it around was after like 115 plate appearances, and then he got hot. And for Handiger, he's only had, I forget, like 80 plate appearances, and so he's not even at the point yet where Conforto started to turn it around. And so he's got such a good track record, like a consistently above average offensive player. And this year he's just been abysmally below average offensively. I just think he needs more time and he deserves more time, and the track record says so. So they're not just going to give up on a guy they just gave a 3-year contract to based on 80 plate appearances. But in center, it's a little bit, especially with Bryce Johnson right now, it's a little bit more open ended. So, anyway, coming up in just a minute, more questions and answers. It's about Brandon Crawford. How will the Giants handle Crawford if he continues to struggle so badly? It's a big question. It's a relevant question, and we'll get into it in just a minute. But before we do, this episode is brought to you by Rocket Money. Do you know how much your subscriptions really cost? Most Americans think they spend around $80 a month on subscriptions, but the actual cost is closer to $200. If you don't know exactly how much you're spending every month, you need Rocket Money. Rocket Money is a personal finance app that finds and cancels your unwanted subscriptions, monitors your spending, and helps you lower your bills all in one place. Over 3 million people have used Rocket Money, saving the average person up to $720 a year. I've used it myself, and I was amazed by how many unnecessary, unwanted subscriptions that I had, and Money made it easy to identify and get rid of those subscriptions, saving me a ton of money. So stop throwing your money away like I was. Cancel unwanted subscriptions and manage your expenses the easy way by going to rocketmoney.com/lockedonmlb. That's rocketmoney.com/lockedonmlb, rocketmoney.com/lockedonmlb. All right, here we go. We are going to be discussing Brandon Crawford and what are the Giants going to do about him if he continues to struggle. Thanks again for making Locked On Giants your first listen every day. Every dayers tomorrow on the show. Giants versus Brewers tonight. Another bullpen game. It wasn't long ago. It was the first game in Minnesota that they had another bullpen game. So I'm not sure if Manaea and Beck are ready to do what they did just a few days ago again. So I'll be very interested to see how they handle it. And it's TBD for the Brewers. And so don't be surprised if that's kind of intentional and they want to mess with the Giants and their, lefties and righties and all that stuff. And so the Giants play the Brewers tonight at 4:40 Pacific. Catch every pitch of the Giants' hometown broadcast on Sirius XM with the SXM app. Search Giants. So yeah, the last round of questions here. Mike Yastrzemski, Enjoyer, says, how will the Giants handle it if Crawford continues to struggle so badly, even when given time off and being platooned? Is it possible that he might be DFA'd midseason if these issues issues at the plate keep up? And Josh says, what do you think the chances are of Crawford returning next season, seeing how he's on the Posey plan of 2 on, 1 off? Also, do you think guys like Estrada and Wade Jr. will be extended anytime soon? Funny, another question about extension. So obviously we already got to that one. And the first question, Mike Yastrzemski, Enjoyer, is only talking about Crawford's struggles at the plate, but I'm also thinking, I've just seen some not great things from Crawford defensively, including yesterday, including in one of those games in Detroit. For the most part, besides yesterday and the games in Detroit, he's been all right, but just not the same guy he once was. And that like I said, like he's out there, he's not hitting at all. And so if you're also not defending at all at such an important position, and you've got a guy like Casey Schmitt on the roster who could probably play a better shortstop at this point, probably. I'm not, there's more than just an arm that goes into playing the position. But anyway, I don't think there's hardly any chance at all that Crawford gets DFA'd. I just think when you're a franchise icon like he is, you find other ways to do it. If you've got to do something like this, you're not just that's just disrespectful. And I don't think there's any way they just DFA him. I suppose anything's possible, but it wouldn't go over well. And sometimes this team has shown that they don't care what the fan reaction is going to be, but I would be shocked if they DFA'd Brandon Crawford. I think more likely you could just see him be someone who doesn't play as often and kind of loses that primary job. And another possibility is the injured list. People have mentioned on Twitter, because I also talked about this yesterday, a phantom injury with a 60-day IL stint. I don't think Crawford would be too pleased about just a 60-day injured list, like where you're really committing to 2 months without the player. And then, of course, they need like rehab assignments to come back and get ready to play again. But I mean, he could be dealing with something physically. It's funny, we saw this last year where he was struggling defensively, and then he went on the IL for a good while and then came back and was like a wizard defensively. And so uh, it could be that he's dealing with something physically now, in which case it might be appropriate to use that injured list and give those chances to somebody else. And, there's a ripple effect. When you move Schmitt to short potentially, then JD Davis is like every day at third base. I guess you could give Davis a day off, move Schmitt to third, and put Estrada at short and Wisely or someone at second base. So there are ways to deal with it, but I don't see a DFA. I do see that eventually, if this continues, they're not just going to keep running him out there just for the sake of he's an icon and we're just going to let him play it out no matter what. I think that's something you probably would have seen under the Bruce Bochy regime, frankly. But I think with Kapler and Farhan, I think there's a lot of pressure on this team to win. And if he's actively hurting the team, then they're going to have to do something about it. So anyway, that is all the time we have for today. Thanks again for making Locked On Giants your first listen every day. Everydayers, tomorrow breaking down game one. Giants going to once again be trying to get back to 500. You're not facing Corbin Burns tonight. It's TBD for the Brewers, so this is a game to take advantage of. And honestly, I feel good about Scott Alexander starting out this game. He's a good reliever, and John Brebbia, for all the griping about bullpen games, has always consistently done a really good job starting these games off. And the Giants held the Twins to 1 run in the last bullpen game. And so it's out of necessity. They've got Manaea underperforming, blah, blah, blah. So anyway, I don't feel so bad about a bullpen game, but we'll see what happens. And you can catch every pitch, by the way, of the Giants' hometown broadcast on SiriusXM on the SXM app. Search Giants. The Giants play the Brewers tonight at 4:40 Pacific. Once again, my name is Ben Kaspick. Check me out on Twitter at Ben Kaspick, Kaspick. If you like this show, please consider rating it or leaving a review. It helps me out a lot, so thanks in advance, and thanks to everyone who's done so already. I can't wait to be with you again tomorrow. Thanks again for listening. You are now Locked On Giants.